The New Orleans Saints might be in need of a new left tackle, but they're not necessarily in need of another starter. We've got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays a Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Brightco. They're a jewelry and watch insurance company bringing you comprehensive, fast, and affordable jewelry insurance for right about as low as $5 a month. Yeah, it's that cheap. Check it out and get your special offer for just our Locked On listeners. Go to get covered in less than 2 minutes over at bright.co/locked on. That's bright.co/locked on. Tell you more about them later on today, but I want to get started today with another live episode of Locked On Saints. So thanks everybody so much for being here. I see that your team every day is in the chat. Carla, I see you. Dan, I see you. Charles, I see you. Eric, I appreciate y'all very much for being here with us for another live episode. We're going to be doing more and more of these over the course of the season. To be honest with you, I'm just plain enjoying them. You seem to be enjoying them too. So give me any feedback, all that, in terms of what you like, and we'll keep all of these going. So look, later on today, there's going to be practice for the New Orleans Saints, but things are changing in terms of what practice looks like. I'll highlight that for you and let you know what you should be looking for from our reports later on today. But then we'll also take a look at the cuts that have already been made as the New Orleans Saints work to get under that 53 or to that 53-man roster limit before Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. But first, we all know that the big news in the New Orleans Saints landscape right now is Trevor Penning. Trevor Penning dealing with an injury that was suspected to sort of be a bad turf toe injury to begin with that he suffered during that Los Angeles Chargers game. Unfortunately, however, after MRIs and scans and all the further testing that needed to be done, it's been found that he actually has a torn ligament in his foot and therefore will need surgery, which means that he is presently out indefinitely. Now, I know when people say out indefinitely, it oftentimes translates to out forever. That's not exactly the case here, and definitely just means that they're not really sure when he's going to be able to come back or if he's going to be able to come back. So you kind of have to wait to see how the surgery goes, how that takes, and then what it means for him moving forward. But this has huge impact on the New Orleans Saints in terms of their depth at left tackle. I've been saying it for the past couple of weeks now that if both Trevor Penning and James Hurst were healthy, that James Hurst would very likely be the week one starter. According to Dennis Allen, James Hurst is going to be back with the team, quote unquote, sooner rather than later, which oftentimes, as I joked around last week, means tomorrow. So we'll see in practice later on today if big number 74 is available and if he's participating in practice. But the fact of the matter is that you've got 2 weeks here before the Saints travel to Atlanta to kick off against the Atlanta Falcons to open up the season. So you've got time to get James Hurst back on the mend. So what does that mean? It means that for the New Orleans Saints, if you're going to be without Trevor Penning, it means that you still need to find another left tackle, but it doesn't mean you need to find a starter. You just have to find some quality depth. And there are already some of those experienced players that are out there, guys like Eric Fisher, guys like Jason Peters, like Nate Solder, they're out there. Is that the route that you go? Or do you wait to see how roster cuts go? Because you're probably going to carry Trevor Penning on your initial 53-man roster before you move him to injured reserve. That way you have the option to bring him back during the season if he's available to do so. So then you can wait until roster cuts are done before you start to figure out who that new left tackle is going to be. Now, of course, you've got guys like Landon Young and Calvin Throckmorton who can also play tackle on either side. Ryan Ramczyk can technically play tackle on the left side as well, but I don't think the Saints are going to move him over there. Why disrupt 2 starters when you don't really need to disrupt any starters at all, considering that James Hurst was probably the starter going into the season anyway. So there's a lot of different ways that the Saints can deal with this, which means that the world's not necessarily over in this case. It stinks that Trevor Penning's injury happened, absolutely, and you never want to see that for anybody, especially a rookie that's just trying to get better, trying to develop, and trying to earn his place in terms of where he was going to be on the team to get started his rookie season. But this isn't something that's going to end up squashing the Saints season before it ever begins. They had a starter in James Hurst already ready to go. He's still expected to be ready to go. He's now the big question mark, right? That you have to kind of watch and see if he's going to end up being available to you, what you need, and if he's going to be able to be out there for you at the beginning of the season. Because, he's dealing with health things and stuff like that. He had the foot injury during the second Green Bay joint practice, and we haven't seen him since. So the Saints are going to have to answer that question. They are very likely going to have to bring somebody back or bring somebody in to kind of help out there, but at least they're in a position to where they don't necessarily need a starter. Another way that the Saints could go would be the trade market. You're going to have a lot of teams right now that are going to be looking to move players to get something in return that they would otherwise just plan on cutting for roster trims anyway. So a guy like Alex Leatherwood out of Las Vegas could be a potential option. There are others out there like there's the big tall tackle for the Green Bay Packers. The Saints got a really, really good look at over the course of their joint practices. And so, maybe there's somebody on that roster that the Saints really like. So there's ways that they can go around making sure that they get the guy that they want, whether that be in the open market via free agency, whether it be via trade, or whether that be via the waiver wire as these teams are making cuts and hoping to get players through waivers and then onto their practice squads. So the Saints should have a lot of options here. They should be okay. The big thing now is to wait and see what happens with Trevor Penning. If the Saints put him on injured reserve before the season technically begins, so before Tuesday night, then that would mean that his season is over. If they wait until after he officially makes the 53-man roster and then move him from the 53-man roster to injured reserve, then they have the option to bring him back after 4 games at minimum, right? He can be out for 6, 7, 8, doesn't matter. They could bring him back later on in the season if they wanted to. So it'd be interesting to just sort of watch and see what the New Orleans Saints are going to do in that case. So the New Orleans Saints in need of a left tackle, not in need of a starter. They're in good enough position here to get started at the beginning of the season and still be able to keep Jameis Winston healthy, keep Jameis Winston clean, and be able to still run their offense. It's going to stink for a little while, but they'll be okay. Coming up next, who has been cut from this New Orleans Saints roster so far as the team tries to get down to the 53-man limit, and which ones are likely to return to the practice squad. Abram Smith is definitely one of those, but was he a little bit of a surprise cut? We'll discuss as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Brightco. Brightco is a jewelry watch insurance company that allows you to get covered in less than 2 minutes over on their website, whether you do it by your phone even. I mean, they make this all super easy. And the thing that I love is that, there are some real-time applications in terms of how this actually ends up impacting you as somebody that maybe he's looking to propose, right? You want to ensure that jewelry ring or that engagement ring so that you don't have to worry about losing it. And if you do, you get it, you have it covered, all that good stuff. So make sure you go and check out Brightco because you should have that peace of mind, that sense of confidence going in to your proposals. Check them out today because these guys are geniuses. They've made buying insurance for your engagement ring, your watch, or whatever so easy that you can get it covered in less than 2 minutes on your cell phone. You're not going to be able to find a better deal with great coverage that's this affordable. Bright.co/locked on. That's bright.co/locked on. Make sure you go and check them out today. In the meanwhile, I also want to take a moment to tell you about our friends over at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing company out there, car sharing marketplace, so that if you're somewhere in the US, the UK, even Canada, you're going to be able to check out a huge selection of vehicles from hosts all over the place for just about any occasion and any budget. So let's say that maybe you're out and you're wanting to do something like a family road trip. You need an SUV or a minivan. They've got you covered. Maybe you're looking for just an affordable economy car to help you get from point A to point B. They've got that for you as well. Or maybe you're looking for a classic or luxury car for a special event like a birthday, a holiday, holiday, maybe even a date, something like that. So you can find all of that over at Turo. So you could test drive that new electric car as well that you've been wondering about getting. Many Turo hosts even deliver the car directly to you, so they make it nice and easy. Every trip is, of course, backed with liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions do apply. Ditch those boring rental cars and find what you want to drive at Turo.com. All right, y'all, continuing on with today's episode, I want to dive in now with a quick look at what roster cuts have been made already, who those players are, and if any of them have an opportunity to potentially return to the practice squad. And one of the cuts so far, of course, felt like a little bit of a surprise that it happened so quickly, and it was the cut to running back Abram Smith. Now, the Saints had sort of been looking at Abram Smith along with Tony Jones Jr. and Dwayne Washington to sort of figure out who's going to be that next running back behind Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. And I was a little bit surprised to see, there you go, Troy. Troy says he needs a new car for his birthday today, so you can go and check out Turo as well. But, you know, you look at where the Saints were in terms of trying to find that guy behind Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram, and you might say now that they're in maybe lesser need than they were before because it's looking less and less like Alvin Kamara's suspension is going to set in here in 2022. Now, we still don't know. It's not like anybody, knows the way that the legal process is going to completely play out or anything like that. Like, that's a tough thing to understand and a tough thing to try to get ahead of. So we just kind of have to wait to see what happens there. But the sort of extra piece to it is that without Alvin Kamara missing up to 6 games in 2022, the need for the running back 3 is a little bit less dire than it was before. I'm not saying that it's not important, but the need for what that position was is not nearly as, let's just say, critical as it was before, where you knew you were going to have to find some way to replace Alvin Kamara for 6 games. Now, you're kind of looking at RB3 as, okay, getting back to special teams, getting back to somebody that can kind of help to share some of the carries so that you can do a bit of the run-by committee situation that the Saints like so much. So really, you're just looking to see exactly what it is that's going to happen in terms of developing the depth there, but not necessarily being in a situation where you need a reserve starter for 6 games. So they're in a better position there. But Abram Smith, pretty much a shoo-in to make it back to the practice squad. I mean, he is probably one of the easiest ones to say, hey, he's going to be there. I mean, the Saints gave him one of the highest amounts of money, guaranteed money, when it comes to an undrafted free agent. So very likely he'll get there. I don't know that he showed enough over the course of preseason or even had enough opportunity over the course of preseason with them looking at some points 4 different running backs throughout those games. I don't know that he really had the opportunity to show anything that's going to keep him from getting through waivers. So it would be based upon draft process and things like that and how teams might feel about him or fell in love with him during that time, or maybe even former Baylor coaching staff, things like that would end up impacting his availability to get back to the practice squad. So in addition to Abram Smith, the Saints have also moved on from a few other players, including offensive lineman Queton Washington and defensive lineman Josh Black. Neither of those guys really had outstanding preseasons or standout camps or anything like that. I could see both of them potentially getting back to the practice squad. However, I mean, those are players that the Saints do like. And, look, the Saints have always invested in undrafted free agent rookie defensive linemen. And so Joshua Black has been somebody that's been kind of on the watch list anyway in terms of that category. So we'll see if he ends up making it back to the team. The Saints also moved on from 2 cornerbacks, Queton Meeks and Brian Allen. Queton Meeks I can absolutely see getting back to the practice squad. He would be maybe one of your more experienced players that has the 2 accrued seasons, but doesn't yet move into the veteran sort of category. So Saints can keep 10 of those players, and then keep 6 that have more than 2 accrued seasons. So Queton Meeks falls right at the limit there. So he'd be one of your more experienced group of 10 in that situation. I thought that he had some really nice moments during camp, particularly in red zone defense. He's 6'1", 208 pounds. He's well built in terms of what the New Orleans Saints look for in a cornerback, and he fits sort of that prototypical size, right? But, you've got ahead of him, you've got 4 corners, 5 if you include C.J. Gardner-Johnson, in Marshall and Lattimore, Paulson, Debo, Bradley, Roby, and then, of course, Alontae Taylor, and you're just not getting above those 4. And if you include C.J. Gardner-Johnson in the cornerback count as opposed to safety count, you're not getting above those 5. So it was merely a numbers game in addition to, the performance that you saw. I wouldn't be surprised to see Brian Allen also end up on the practice squad, but it'll be it'll kind of be between him and DeMarcus Fields. I think that Brian Allen had the better performance out of the two, though. Abram Smith, of course, was moved on from. I think that he's a shoo-in to get back to the practice squad. And then left tackle Derek Kelly, which is interesting based upon what we were just discussing, right? The Saints kind of thin now at that depth where they need, at left tackle and everything, but then they moved on from Derek Kelly. So clearly they have a plan here in terms of what they're looking for. I can see Derek Kelly making it back to the practice squad as one of the more than 2 accrued seasons players. You get 6 of those slots for veteran guys on your practice squad. I could see him getting into one of those spots, although he might not even have the more than 2 accrued seasons because he hasn't started that many games. He hasn't been on the field for that many games. So he might actually fall under the other category there. But either way, I could see many of these guys getting back to the practice squad. Josh Black and Kalik Washington are kind of the 2 biggest question marks there. But guys like Brian Kelly, Queton Meeks, Abram Smith, and Derek Kelly all seem like shoo-ins for me. The thing about Derek Kelly that it gives you is that it just gives you an extra left tackle on your roster basically for emergency situations and things like that, because we have to remember that if Trevor Penning is going to miss extensive time, which he will, you have been dealing with some injuries when it comes to James Hurst, so you want to have those additional players. So that's one of the reasons why a guy like Landon Young and a guy like Calvin Throckmorton becomes so important, why going to the market for a veteran left tackle makes a ton of sense, but you also want to keep somebody stashed away kind of in that reserve situation just in case, right? So Derek Kelly could absolutely be that guy. I see somebody asking in the chat about Alontae Taylor, not hearing about him for a long time. He's been hurt for a little while. He had a hip flexor injury back, I believe, before the Green Bay joint practices, if I'm remembering correctly. I might be confusing my timelines, but he's been dealing with a hip flexor injury and everything. He was dressed out during the Friday night game against Los Angeles Chargers. So that was really good. He was in full uniform and all that. We just didn't see him play. So we'll see if he's at practice later on today. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about practice because we're going to have our open viewing period here in just a few hours. And then I'll be back for another episode to kind of update you on everything that we learned from that practice and the little bit there. But I'm going to talk about what's important and what we're going to be looking for. Corey, yes, Kelly was cut. I was talking about him potentially getting back to the practice squad. And so we'll get to what you need to know before we head out to today's practice, whether or not Michael Thomas is going to be available, and what other big questions you should be looking to answer later on today. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. Listen, I absolutely love PrizePicks. PrizePicks daily fantasy, the way that it should be done, right? It's super simple. You go into your PrizePicks account, you get everything set up, and then all you have to do is basically pick over under. So let's just say for the Atlanta Falcons game, for the New Orleans Saints opening up the season in just a couple of weeks, you can go in and you can pick over on passing yardage for Jameis Winston, over on receiving yardage for Alvin Kamara, over on receiving yardage for Michael Thomas, because you know they're going to go off on the Atlanta Falcons. You might as well take the over on Taysom Hill, whatever they have, because Taysom Hill's always a beast against the Atlanta Falcons as well. So it's really cool, right? Like, you're not doing this whole thing to where you're kind of hoping that you're going to get enough like fantasy points and all this other stuff. You're literally just saying, I think this player is going to outperform or overperform their expectation. And that leads to more payouts, bigger payouts, and everything. 10 times, you went up to 10 times your money on an entry in some of these. And you can even play it. You can scale it down a little bit so that if you miss one or two, you can still walk away with some winnings. So it's really cool. They've got everything from NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA. You can even get into things like soccer. They've got disc golf. They've got cricket. They've got Call of Duty, esports, whole bunch of stuff that you can check out. Currently operational in 30 states as well as Canada. All you have to do is download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com and sign up today for your daily fantasy sports. First-time users can get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. You see it here on the screen. If you deposit $100, that means that PrizePicks will also give you $100 on top of that. Or if you deposit, let's say $50, they'll give you $50. So don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On when you sign up for that instant deposit match up to $100. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with what you need to know about practice going into today. Before we get into it, I want to remind you about Wednesday, our Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 is getting underway. We're going to be launching with the AFC and then getting into the NFC next week. But over 50 experts, 8 episodes, giving you everything you need to know and answering all of your questions division by division going through and into the 2022 season. So make sure you check that out. It's the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, wherever you get your podcast. And it's also going to be on the Locked On NFL YouTube page as well. So the next piece that I want to look at here is practice going into 2022 or going into today, because now things kind of shift a little bit, right? Used to be that we were there for the entirety of those training camp practices. Now we go to basically what's called a viewing window. And that viewing window will include stretch, it'll include some individual drills, and that's about it. So we're not going to see any of the full team drills, the game plan stuff like that. So you're not going to get updates like, hey, Jameis Winston went 4 for 4 in team drills and stuff like that. Like that, unfortunately, that part of the practice viewing period is over. However, what we do get now is that viewing period where we can see if players are present or not present during that open viewing area. We'll get interviews, of course, pretty much every day in person with Dennis Allen. And then we also have open locker room back, because that's now back, after all the COVID policies kind of changed all that. And by the way, Real Theseus came through, Alex came through with a great question the other day about how the COVID sort of procedures are working, protocols and everything are working going into 2022. We'll get to that in a later episode this week going into next week, because I thought that was a really great question. But this is a big part of it, is that we now get open locker room again. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So what should you be looking for today from practice? Here are the things that you want to know. Is Alontae Taylor present? Of course. Is Michael Thomas present? Is James Hurst present? Those are going to be 3 big ones to watch. You might also be curious about some other players like Taysom Hill, who is inactive during Friday night's game, Adam Trautman, who's missed the last few practices. But in terms of investment, as well as the biggest names on your team and the players that you have the biggest questions about, those 3 guys, Alontae Taylor, Michael Thomas, as well as James Hurst, are huge that you want to see going into today's practice and that you'd like to see present. Another guy that you're going to be looking out for, of course, throughout all of this is going to be, how's Jameis Winston looking, right? I think he doesn't seem like there's been any issue for him at all when it comes to, Friday's game. He looked great. He was mobile, took some hits, delivered some passes, all that looked really, really good. So I think the last player you may be looking for is number 20, Pete Werner. Lots of question marks around what the New Orleans Saints linebacker room is going to look like in 2022, right? And a lot of that has to do with some of the injuries that you've seen there. Chase Hansen's been dealing with injury. Pete Werner's been dealing with injury. The Saints brought Kiko Alonso back from it for a day, and then he retired. You have all of this stuff that's been going on over at linebacker that's been so interesting over the course of the offseason, but does leave you with some questions in terms of, who's the depth. Is Pete Werner available? He's practiced, I think, maybe 6 times out of 20 practices, maybe even fewer than that. So it's a little bit challenging there. So you're going to want to see if Pete Werner is back out there and on the field. Now, we've seen him sort of present and off to the side and things like that. So that's good news, but that's the big thing. So those are the big ones you're going to be looking for. Michael Thomas, Pete Werner, James Hurst, Alontae Taylor. Those are kind of the big ones. And then maybe you're kind of a little bit curious around Adam Trautman as well, but there's time there. But those big 4 names are the ones that you're going to want to make sure are on the field. You want them to be present during that time. So we'll see. Eric Howard asked a really great question here. What about Marcus Davenport? My expectation is that Marcus Davenport is continuing on with that ramp up, but he was already there. He's been participating. He got some snaps. He's been looking good. So yeah, maybe you're curious if he's there, but it seems that all signs point to the fact that he will be there because he hasn't been missing as of late. So that's the only reason why I didn't bring him up, but absolutely you're there. Okay. Coming up later on today / into tomorrow morning, who are the big players that were present, that were absent? What did we learn? What did we figure out from Dennis Allen's upcoming presser later on today? And of course, open locker room. So we have a whole bunch of stuff coming up, including even just, some of these players who could potentially be traded going into those roster cuts, right? We're getting now to where we are just about 30 hours away from when those roster cuts have to be finished. So there's a lot in a kind of a flurry of transactions that will happen before that, and then another flurry of transactions that will happen after that deadline as well. So we'll start to look at all of that later on today and get you caught up with any other cuts, transactions, stuff like that that are made by the end of today. So we got all that coming up for you later on. Still working on trying to find ways to do these 2-a-days. Figured this would be an easy way to do it. Live show in the morning and then bring you all those updates from practice in the evening. We'll see how it goes. I appreciate y'all as always for being here for another live episode. And of course, for making us your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen, make sure you're going to check out the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, so you you know everything going on in the fantasy world so that you can win some of your fantasy leagues. You can check them out every Monday through Friday, wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. I appreciate y'all, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And of course, if you need anything else in between these episodes on your New Orleans Saints, make sure you're following along on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.